in this painting by the Pre-Raphaelite Arthur Hughes, which was painted in 1856. Now, it was in that year, in fact, that the first coal tar dye was made by the chemist William Perkin, who was only 18 years old at the time. He was studying at the Royal College of Chemistry under the German chemist August Wilhelm Hoffmann, and he discovered this coal tar dye called mauve while trying to do something completely different. He was trying to make the anti-malarial drug quinine. He found he suddenly had this mauve stuff on his hands, and he decided he was going to take a risk on this. He quit his studies and he persuaded somehow his father and his brother to set up business with him and to build a factory in Harrow to produce this dye. And this gamble paid off. And half a century later, here's Perkin as a shy and reluctant celebrity, and as he became regarded as one of the greatest organic chemists of all time. And here he's holding some of the purple, the mauve dyed material that he produced. These coal tar dyes were followed by synthetic versions of natural dyes. So in 1868, chemists figured out how to make a molecule called alizarin, which is the molecule that gives madder red its colour. And then in 1877, they found out how to make indigo. So instead of having to rely on plants to produce these materials, they could just synthesize them from coal tar and from raw materials. And this led to the collapse of these dye-growing industries in Europe and in the British colonies in India. But it also spawned the entire modern chemicals industry. The commercial call for these dyes was immense, and dye manufacturers thrived. And towards the end of the century, they began to diverse into new areas, particularly pharmaceuticals. In 1909, Paul Ehrlich discovered the first synthetic drug, Salvarsan, a cure for syphilis. And he found that after experimenting with the staining of cells using these modern synthetic dyes. All the chemical giants of today, Hearst, BASF, Agfa, Bayer, Ciba-Geigy, all these giant chemical companies began their lives as dye manufacturers. So you could say that not only did chemistry give us colour, but the quest for colour gave us modern chemistry. Now, the pigments of modern times encode their own stories about how art evolved in the 20th century. And if I'd had time, which I don't, I would talk to you about the influential colour theory of the chemist Wilhelm Ostwald, who was also an amateur painter and who made his own pigments. I'd like to have traced the evolution of the day-glow colours that Andy Warhol and Roy Lichtenstein used, or the impact of new synthetic paint media like acrylics and alkyds. These had an impact on the colour choices of painters like the abstract expressionists. In the 1950s, American artists like Frank Stella started to use household paints that were made using these new resins. And so the palettes that they used were pretty much at the mercy of the people, these commercial companies making household paints. And so people like Stella took colour into a completely new territory. For example, they used metallic paints in some of their works, metallic paints that were meant for industrial uses. But I'll conclude with a single modern parable about chemistry and colour in art, and that's the story of the world's most beautiful blue. Yves Klein was never an artist in the league of Turner or Rembrandt or Titian, but he's remembered for one thing: International Klein blue, which he used in a series of monochrome paintings from the 1950s, and here it is. I knew this would happen. This one's the wrong way around, actually. No, just actually, to be fair, this is a colour that you can't do justice in a slide. I mean, it's if you haven't seen one of Yves Klein's monochrome paintings, I'd recommend you do, because you don't really see the lustre, the texture of this paint, and that's the key to it. Yves Klein believed that colour alone was sufficient to say all he had to say. And in 1954, he said, "I believe that in future people will start painting pictures in one single colour and nothing else but colour." And that's just what he did. Now, Klein's blue is in fact nothing else than ultramarine. But ultramarine never looked like it did before he used it. Klein realised that pigments tended to look richer and more gorgeous when they were just powder rather than mixed with a binder to make a paint. And he wanted to try to find a way to capture that appearance, that sort of lustrous appearance of the dry powder in a paint. And in 1955, he found his answer. It was a new synthetic resin that was made by the Rhone-Poulenc Chemicals Company. And he found this could be thinned to act as a binder without impairing the chromatic strength, the brilliance of the pigment. And this gave the paint surface a sort of matte, velvety texture. And Klein collaborated with a Parisian chemical manufacturer named Edouard Adam to develop a recipe for binding ultramarine into this resin and to protect this wonderful new paint from what he would consider to be misuse. He patented it in 1960, so he patented this colour. The significance of this little episode in art history is to show not only that some artists were still depending on chemical assistance in the modern era, but also that the intimate relationship of painters to their materials had not been entirely severed. Today, painting is an unfashionable art. Young artists want to work in sculpture and installation and video. And one hears stories about how students at art schools who wish to do something as outmoded as painting automatically risk getting lower marks. There are still painters who care deeply about colour and paint, but there aren't many of them. And in an age when painters have more choice of materials than ever before, this might seem strange. But I wonder whether, in a way, that surplus of choice might contain the very problem. Artists have lost confidence in paint because they feel they no longer understand it. And I can't help but feel sad at how different this is from the spirit that is apparent in an account by the photographer Brassai of a conversation that he had with Picasso. So to finish with, this is Picasso, and this is what Brassai said. Then the man in the blue suit reaches into his pocket and takes out a large sheet of paper, which he carefully unfolds and hands to me. It's covered with Picasso's handwriting, less spasmodic, more studied than usual. At first sight, it resembles a poem. 20 or so verses are assembled in a column surrounded by broad white margins. Each verse is prolonged with a dash, occasionally a very long one. But it is not a poem. It is Picasso's most recent order for colours. For once, all the anonymous heroes of Picasso's palette trooped forth from the shadows, with permanent white at their head. Each had distinguished himself in some great battle: the Blue Period, the Rose Period, Cubism, Guernica. Each could say, I too, I was there. And Picasso, reviewing his old comrades in arms, gives to each of them a sweep of his pen, a long dash that seems a fraternal salute. Welcome, Persian red. Welcome, emerald green. Cerulean blue, ivory black, cobalt violet, clear and deep. Welcome, welcome. Thank you.
So, this is how the history of art is inextricably linked to the chemistry that made it possible. And I can understand Ball's exuberance at revealing to us the hidden scientific genius behind all great works of art. But alas, it's the Van Goghs and the Matisses we will remember. The George Fields and the William Perkins, we will not. I can only imagine the look on Rembrandt's face when he was told exactly what made Indian yellow so yellow. We must, however, heed the lessons learned from Carl Wilhelm's use of arsenic in green paint, and we should never assume that the problems of pigment toxicity belong to the past. Pigments and dyes are used in fabrics and plastics, paints and computer printers, and well, they can affect us. Being the father of a beautiful little girl, I can't help but worry. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to hang this on a wall. For big ideas, I'm Andrew Moody.